If you've ever flown in a plane, you know that it's generally a safe and quick way to get around. In fact, air travel is statistically far safer than driving, even though it may not seem like it to many of us. Nonetheless, sometimes scary moments can occur in the flight to remind us that air travel is not without its dangers. From hijackings and mechanical failure to near misses and bad weather, these flights are all considered to be some of the scariest ever. Tenzing Hillary Airport. While there are definitely specific flights which are scary, it's important to note that certain airports can cause more than a little stress when trying to land or take off. The poster child of this is surely Tenzing Hillary Airport, located in Nepal. Located 3 kilometers up in the Himalayan mountains, the winds are high, cloud cover thick, and runway short. All of this makes landing here an extreme challenge. To make matters worse, pilots can't abort a landing at the last minute because there's no way to avoid the treacherous terrain immediately around the runway. U.S. Airways Flight 1549. In January 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia Airport in New York City. Just moments after lifting off the runway, the 155 passengers and crew were placed in a dire situation when multiple bird strikes caused a massive loss of power in both engines. Unable to make it back to the airport, the pilot was forced to ditch in the Hudson River. Amazingly, every single person survived the extremely short yet terrifying ordeal. Ethiopian Flight 961. In November 1996, Ethiopian Flight 961 was heading from Ethiopia to Kenya when 3 men stormed the cabin and demanded to fly to Australia. Not believing the plane didn't have enough fuel, they forced the pilot to fly east. Near the Comoros Islands, the 767 ran out of fuel and was forced to land just off of a beach packed with tourists. 50 of the 175 people aboard lived to retell the harrowing experience. Aloha Airlines Flight 243. In 1988, a 737 airliner of Aloha Airlines Flight 243 was making a short-distance flight to Honolulu. At 24,000 feet, the plane suffered explosive decompression and a third of its roof came off. One stewardess was sucked out and passengers, still strapped in their seats, were exposed to the cold air as the plane miraculously continued to fly. The plane ended up making a successful landing with only 1 fatality. United Airlines Flight 826. In December 1997, United Airlines Flight 826 was flying from Japan to Hawaii when it hit very bad turbulence. At one point, the plane suddenly dropped 30 meters, sending people and objects crashing around the cabin. In the end, 1 person was killed and 18 were injured. Air Transat Flight 236. In August 2001, an Air Transat flight from Toronto to Portugal suddenly lost power over the Atlantic. Unknown to the crew, the plane had been losing fuel for the past 4 hours because of a leak. When the passenger liner was 120 kilometers from the nearest airport in the Azores Islands, it ran out of fuel. The silence caused by the 2 dead engines must have been terrifying to the passengers, who could only sit and wait. With only 1 shot at landing, the pilots were able to glide the plane over the entire distance and still put it down safely. TWA Flight 847. In June 1985, TWA Flight 847 from Cairo to San Diego was hijacked by members of Hezbollah. Demanding the release of prisoners, the hijackers forced the plane to make repeated flights back and forth between Beirut and Algiers. For 3 days this continued, with each stop seeing some hostages released or removed from the plane and more armed hijackers boarding. Eventually, everyone was freed from the ordeal, but only after days of uncertainty and 1 fatality. Piedmont 1489. In August 1989, passengers aboard the Piedmont Flight 1489 found out how scary a stuck landing gear can be. The passenger jet was preparing for landing in North Carolina when the pilot noticed one landing gear was jammed. No matter what the crew tried, it wouldn't come down. The pilot even grew so desperate as to touch down on the one gear and bump the plane up and down to loosen the other, to no avail. In the end, passengers had to endure a bumpy and loud one-geared landing, which fortunately ended happily for all. British Airways Flight 9. In June 1982, British Airways Flight 9, a 747 jumbo jet with 248 passengers, was flying over Indonesia when all 4 engines stopped. As the crew worked hard to restart the engines, the pilot calmly announced to the scared passengers, that the engines had failed. Why had they failed? It turns out ash from a nearby volcanic eruption had damaged the engines and contaminated the fuel. To the crew's horror, it had also sandblasted the windscreen opaque, making an eventually successful landing extremely difficult. Northwest Airlines Flight 253. On Christmas Day 2009, passengers aboard Northwest Airlines Flight 253 from Amsterdam to Detroit faced a terrifying situation. First, as the plane prepared to land, passengers smelled smoke. Then they noticed a fire where one of the passengers was sitting. When some people approached the seat where Umar Abdulmutallab was sitting, they quickly realized that it wasn't a fire, but an attempt to detonate a bomb sewn into his underwear. Passengers restrained the would-be bomber and ensured the plane landed safely. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Hopefully, none of us end up on a plane remotely like any of these flights. Anyway, while you're here, check out these other videos, and please don't forget to click like and subscribe. Thanks!